Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are now going to be just diving in quickly here on Team USA's win over South Sudan that took place over the weekend. This was another one of the exhibition games as we continue to run through here, but Team USA got a little bit of a scare here, and I feel like people are sort of waiting on this team a little bit to, I wouldn't even say, fully take off because they're undefeated at this point. They've had a couple, significant wins in terms of ultimately they were able to pull away from Serbia and rout them. Team Canada as well. Granted, in that game, I think that Canada punted a little bit early in the fourth quarter, considering the fact that it was just an exhibition game. There wasn't quite as much of a need to go all out for it. But, the U.S. has seen their share of struggles over the course of the first few games, and that was the case yet again here against South Sudan, where they were down by as much as 16 points early in this game. Now, again, they are able to, turn it around, and we see that with this Team USA roster and this collection of basketball players that once they do fully click, there is very little stopping them. But even that being said, South Sudan outscored the U.S., I believe, in that fourth quarter when things were tight. So there's definitely a case to be made that this team is, not preparing quite in the right way mentally. And it's something that is just, I feel like, really in basketball, more so than any other sport, we tend to have these conversations about the idea of overlooking your opponents. And, Steve Kerr sort of chalked it up to that as well, said that it was on him, sort of part of the way that just their preparation was not good enough. South Sudan is, I believe, a country that just recently started implementing, a focus on the basketball team. Thought I saw somewhere that Gorgie Jang, recently retired NBA player, has been placed in charge of the construction of these rosters. And it's not like Sudan is without any NBA talent whatsoever, but clearly not on the same level as Team USA whatsoever, and this could have potentially been the biggest upset in Team USA basketball history. Now, again, still exhibition, so as we talk through all of these ideas, I'm gonna, it's important to keep in mind that there isn't quite that level of desperation for any of these programs to some degree, but especially for the US, where they are the ones with the target on their back, that they're just trying to figure themselves out, and all of these other teams are kind of gunning for them to some degree, because if you beat the US, you can beat anybody, is, I feel like, kind of the way that everybody else is looking at it. And the US is ultimately able to pull this one out 101-100. It did come to the final seconds where I believe it was JT Thor for South Sudan was able to hit a corner three with about 20 seconds left to put South Sudan up by one. And it was LeBron coming down on the other side of the court and just continuing to show that, if he is committed, the physical force that he is, he's probably still has a number of years in the NBA if he would choose to do so. The fact that it is a conversation that he's still in that top 10, 15 players in the NBA. Now, some people might say that's disrespectful, and to that I would say, just ask Joel Embiid, because he made some very interesting comments on LeBron James, and the legacy, where Embiid, I'm paraphrasing here, so I don't want to act it like it's any direct quotes, but he was essentially saying that, you look at the names on the roster and you talk about how talented they are, but he almost directly referenced the fact that, LeBron is an older, that these players, including a LeBron, a Kevin Durant, that they are much older versions of themselves, and they're not quite at the peak of their all-time powers, which was just a weird thing to say for him. But LeBron was incredible in this game, 23 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists on 10 of 14 from the field. So, LeBron. Also, something noteworthy is the fact that him and Curry were the two players that got the most amount of playing time in this game, both playing 23 minutes, and that's something to just sort of take into consideration to some degree as well, because of the fact that, we're talking about these older players and how much runway are they going to get during these Olympics. LeBron has already said that this is his last time that he's ever going to play in the Olympics. You feel like that might be a similar destiny for Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, and the fact that they are still sort of the alphas on this team, and they've been getting big playing time. But you want to talk about playing time, and I also just mentioned Joel Embiid. That is obviously one of the bigger subplots with this Team USA at this point. Embiid, and I think that it can be a little bit unwarranted to some degree, the amount of criticism that Embiid gets, but at the same time, you look at Embiid at this point where we understand when he's fully healthy, he is one of the most dominant forces in the NBA on both sides of the floor, and injuries have definitely taken away from what is undoubtedly going to be a Hall of Fame career. And Embiid was asked about the idea of whether he is in the conversation for the greatest player of all time over the weekend, or if he would have been if it weren't for the injuries. And it's going to be one of the bigger what ifs in NBA history, at least recently. But Embiid, the fact of the matter is that he has not been very durable throughout the course of his career, and something that he doesn't really get slack for, I feel like, at least from Embiid defenders, which is fair, but he has struggled to come into seasons in good shape. I feel like that's been a pretty consistent storyline with him, is, when it comes to that fourth quarter, and again, injuries do play into this to some degree as well, and those physical ailments that he's put up with, but when it comes to the fourth quarter, and again, I would take this year out of it because he wasn't able to play basketball for months, and finally he came in for the play-in down the stretch of the season, the play-in tournament, the playoffs, where he struggled in the fourth, but that's not even really what I'm referring to, because at that point he had already, he had just missed months of basketball. So I give him a little bit of a pass there, but it doesn't change the fact that throughout his career, I do think that this has kind of been the case with him, where he doesn't always have the, you talk about durability of being able to play in the first place. Joel Embiid playing in the fourth quarter is not the same version of himself that we see early on, and that's the case for every single NBA player, but I think it's a significant difference with Embiid. And, I talked about playing time just a minute or so ago. Anthony Davis was one of the top guys off of the bench in this game, as he consistently has been for the early exhibition games here for Team USA. Yet again, outplaying Embiid in terms of minutes. Now, the timing of doing the Anthony Davis versus Joel Embiid for being the starter may not be the greatest time to do so, because Anthony Davis did have probably his first, I would say, poor-ish offensive game, where he ended up in this one with, I believe it was 15 points, but it was on 4 of 12 from the field, so not his best offensive showing, but still active on the glass. He led the Team USA in rebounds throughout the course of the game. I believe he led all players in rebounds in this game, outside of, actually, it was Carlick Jones, who I had remembered a little bit, I believe, at least from college when he played there. But Anthony Davis is somebody that is continuing to make it a conversation about who should be starting for Team USA. And Steve Kerr, he has shut it down entirely himself anyways. The fact that he said there are 3 players that are unquestionably going to be in the starting lineup for the US. It is Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid. So interesting for him to do so. The combination of the big men off of the bench between Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo has been pretty successful up to this point, but not, it's an interesting conversation, and it feels like it shouldn't be, considering that Embiid, when he is healthy, he is in that top 5 conversation. People say he's a shoo-in. I think it's a little bit more debatable because of the health factor, but if you're talking about talent, I mean, it's really hard to come up with, 5 players better than Embiid. But, all this to be said, that is still an ongoing, conversation here as to who should be the final starter. But the last thing I want to highlight here from this game is the fact that we saw Derrick White finally getting some real minutes. He had been kind of on that bench mob for the U.S. for the first couple games, and he was also a late addition to the team, to be fair, but Steve Kerr decided to roll with Derrick White, specifically in the second half of this game. He started the second half, he ended up closing the game, and his stat line does not jump out necessarily by any means. He only took 1 shot, but the thing is with Derrick White is he is just one of those unselfish players that you need the glue guy, and the U.S. so far has been leaning on Drew Holiday, and he's shown that he is a glue guy in the way that specifically he plays into the defense and everything. But Derrick White is another one of those guys that could end up kind of taking away some of the minutes from Tyrese Halliburton, who only played 7 minutes in this game. Nelson of the basketball podcast was texting me about whether or not he thought that Halliburton was hurt. I think it's more so that Steve Kerr right now just trusts Derrick White a little bit more. And, obviously if you're talking about a star to run your team, that's where the answer is definitely Halliburton. But Derrick White is going to be an interesting piece to this whole puzzle because he plays in those 11 minutes all in the second half. He has 5 assists in that playing time, the most of any player in the game in the second half, 4 assists. And, he's shown that he's a player that can hit big shots. He's not necessarily the personal creator, but if you give him opportunities in crunch time, he's going to convert. So that's a little bit of a developing storyline as well when you're talking about the hierarchy of this team. And granted, that's all going to be thrown off as soon as Kevin Durant returns. We're still waiting on him to come back. Have to imagine that he's going to be a starter. The starting lineup has been changing throughout here. Drew Holiday and Devin Booker ended up starting this game. I believe that's the same starting lineup as game 1 was, but Steve Kerr has played around with Jason Tatum in the starting lineup for a couple games, Anthony Edwards once, so that's going to be another interesting sort of wrinkle into this whole conversation is what does the minutes distribution look like when Kevin Durant does return. But definitely let us know what your thoughts on the comments were, or what your takeaways were on this game. But we're going to be sticking with some basketball here. Over the weekend, the Boston Celtics signed another player from their team last season to a contract extension. This time, Sam Hauser, who is a bench option for them. Very nice player, but it seemed like he was sort of a no-brainer that he was going to play out the last season with Boston and then walk in free agency, go get himself a deal. But instead, he signs one with the Celtics, which just adds on to all of the other contracts that the Celtics have thrown out this offseason. So we're going to be diving into that and what it looks like financially for the Celtics moving forward, as they are going to be the most expensive team in NBA history significantly. And whether or not they're going to be able to maintain that, or how much of it really they're going to be able to maintain over the course of the next couple years, because they can't keep everybody. They cannot financially afford that. So we're going to dive into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.